We're in much worse shape than we were in '08, and I don't see a bailout working again. This is a horrific crisis, and the only way out of it is to make it worse. I think there's a real possibility that we will have red lines. Everybody is wiped out then.
There we go. Hi, Mr. Schiff. Can you hear us?
Yeah, I got you.
All right. Okay, great, perfect. Well, first of all, appreciate you jumping on here. I know you're a busy man, so appreciate you. Can you first, just to start us off, to explain exactly what CBDCs are for people that might not know?
Well, you're talking about central bank digital currencies, which I guess right now don't technically exist, but I think a lot of central banks are working on the projects, discussing it. It's a reaction to the demand for digital currencies that have been created in the private sector, and the idea that, well, maybe they would work in the government sector. But the main reason that the private sector has come up with these is to facilitate speculation. I mean, nobody's really using digital currencies like Bitcoin, for example, as a medium of exchange. I mean, they just use it to speculate. People are betting that the price is going to go up, and so they buy them and they hold on to them in anticipation of selling in the future at a higher price. But in theory, sure. I mean, if you have a stable enough digital a token that can be actually used as a unit of account and a medium of exchange, it could function. But if you have a digital currency that's tied to the dollar, it's not going to be a store of value. It's going to have the same problem as the dollar, which is that it's being inflated and its purchasing power is eroding over time. And so that the same thing would happen to a digital currency that was backed by the dollar. Now, the question is, would it be more efficient if we had a digital currency to transact in rather than debit cards, Venmo, PayPal, ACH transfers, Apple Pay? I mean, all sorts of other ways that we currently transact with one another without having to use physical bills. I don't know. I mean, I don't know that there really is a need for a central bank, digital currency. But from the perspective of the central bank, I can see why they would want one. If you have a government that wants to spy on every one of its citizens and know exactly what everybody is doing, what they're buying, what they're selling, where the transactions are taking place. It's a huge, big brother Orwellian type tool that you would not want a government to have. If you're a citizen and you care about individual liberty, you would not want to give that much power to the government, which is probably why the government wants it. And the other risk, apart from personal privacy and the ability to resist a tyrannical government, which is when that type of surveillance would be the most damaging to liberty, is as the governments get more oppressive. If the citizens try to band together or resist tyranny, it's harder to do that when the government can spot you and get rid of you very quickly because they're able to see everything you're doing. But also, I think it would tend to be even more inflationary than the fiat system we have now, because you would make the mechanism of creating money and putting it into the economy even quicker. So the Fed could inflate the money supply even faster, and it could even have strings attached. It could give everybody new money, but say you've got to spend it in 24 hours or it's gone, or whatever they're trying to do, or they can target it. Well, it's only good in certain stores and it's only good for certain types of merchandise. I mean, who the hell knows? But it just gives way too much power to the government. I'm all in favor of private sector currencies that would be, backed by gold or something that would give them a real value. But the problem is the governments don't want that, and so they're stifling that innovation with regulations.
Yes, sir. And we were definitely going to say, it seems to be their selling point, the efficiency aspect of it. But and they've even said out in front at the World Economic Forum, and Augustine Carsons, which is the general manager of the Bank of International Settlements, saying this is a surveillance tool and a tool as a means of control. They come out and just say that, which is
interesting to say the least to on the aspect of the individuals and citizens like us. How would you recommend people like hedge against a system like this? Right now we have the Fed Now system, which we want to like ask you about as well, but it seems like that's just a baby version of what's to come. And do you see just like a way out of this and through like parallel systems, or do you see just a different way?
Well, first of all, they try to scare the population into accepting the surveillance as if it's a good thing because, the government's going to protect us from the bad guys, right? If the government can simply monitor everything that we do, they'll be able to stop terrorism. They'll be able to stop money laundering or drug dealing. I mean, what they're really concerned about is taxation and tax evasion or avoidance. That's really what all this is about. It's got nothing to do with terrorists. I mean, there's not enough terrorists in the world for it to even matter. And the government doesn't really care too much about that. What they care about is their tax revenue. And so they think that to the extent that they can better monitor all of the spending in the economy, it will be harder for people to avoid taxes. And that just means that tax rates are going to go even higher, right? Because the harder the government makes it for you to escape taxation, the more incentive they have to raise the rate. This is not a good thing. And of course, it's not just criminals that could be concerned about privacy. Everybody should be concerned about the government knowing too much about them and about everybody else. But the way to escape it, of course, I guess, is to have an alternative medium of exchange that the government can't track. So if they end up eliminating paper, then you're going to have something else. I mean, maybe silver coins, maybe something that you could use instead of paper. Or, you can obviously use a currency of another country, assuming those currencies haven't been withdrawn from circulation due to the adoption of a central bank digital currency, outside the United States. But probably most people would resort to using, real money. You could use silver coins, gold coins, things like that. I mean, some people might just end up, resorting to barter if they wanted to avoid the government surveillance.
Yeah, kind of on that same, what you were just saying right there about the whole fear mongering stuff. We were just a while ago, we were talking to G. Edward Griffin. He is the author of the Creature from Jekyll Island, about the founding of the Federal Reserve. And he was telling us about, he had this idea that the Federal Reserve and WEF were purposefully doing these things to accelerate inflation, all these raises the minimum wage, all this different stuff, so that later on they can come in and say, oh, well, we have the solution. We can save you guys. Here's CBDCs. Here's the central bank digital currencies, whatever it might be. That was his idea. Do you think that it's all like purposeful, that it's all malice for that specific reason, or do you think it's more like a bunch of useful idiots?
He basically said like if they're doing a controlled demolition of the control of the banking system as we know it.
I think it's more the latter. I think people give our leaders too much credit. I don't think they could design the destruction of the country on purpose. I think it's just a byproduct of their own political self-interest. I mean, I think that's really all the politicians are concerned about, or the central bankers, which are really just politicians. They're just perpetuating their careers, their reelection. And so rather than confront a problem that could cause some short-term pain to resolve, they kick the can down the road, even if that means making the problem bigger, which means the long-term pain that they refuse to face is even greater. As a result of their having postponed the inevitable. So we're going to have a crisis. I mean, we're probably in the beginning of one now, as inflation is, reared its head over the last few years. And now the bond market is finally crashing. We have the highest interest rates in about 15 years. We're almost back at 5% now on a 30-year treasury, but we still have a long way to go up. Meanwhile, we've got 33.4 trillion of national debt, the last 440 trillion added in the last 2 weeks. The curve is accelerating, the rate at which the national debt is piling up, and interest becomes a bigger and bigger percent of the budget. I mean, it's already passed national defense. By next year, it'll probably pass Social Security and Medicare as the single biggest line item in the budget, and it's just spiraling. And in a few years, interest payments on the debt will exceed 100% of tax revenue. Now, obviously, that can't even happen, I don't think. I think that somewhere between now and then, there'll be a sovereign debt crisis and a currency crisis. Now, the government didn't create this on purpose. It's just the consequence of all the mismanagement and the bad monetary and fiscal policy. But that said, they're not going to let the crisis go to waste. They're good politicians.
Right.
And so what they're going to say is, aha, this just proves how bad capitalism is. I mean, we've always known it's no good. I mean, look what it did in 2008. We had these greedy bankers that caused the financial crisis. And here they are again. The banks are failing again because of reckless capitalism. We need more government control. We need to give the Federal Reserve even more power. In fact, we probably need to nationalize the banks and a lot of other industries because we can't be trusted, with greedy capitalists. We need benevolent, caring, all-wise government bureaucrats to take over the economy, right? Because they care about people and they're going to do the right thing and they're selfless. They're public servants. Who knows? But they're going to come up with all this nonsense, but they're not going to accept responsibility for creating the problem that they're going to try to blame on capitalism.
Interesting. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Now, a couple of states have stood up, like Florida. Ron DeSantis has said no CBDCs here in Florida. Texas done similar things, although a little bit different. Indiana, same as well. And there seems to be a move, even in Congress, going on right now to potentially thwart and kind of halt the CBDCs on a national level. Do you hold out hope that over time this might be the case? Because, it's a very un-American idea. And hopefully that can get through to... these are politicians, but, hopefully that can kind of stand up.
Yeah, well, it really is a situation of the camel's nose under the tent, because if they were to create the central bank digital currency and it could exist in parallel with paper currency and people could have a choice as to whether or not they wanted to use it, I suppose it wouldn't be that big a deal. But the fear is that once they introduce it, they'll take away the choice. They'll say, hey, you can't use the paper. We're going to get rid of that. And you have to use the digital currency. But again, I don't like the idea that the government could just load up a wallet with money out of thin air and just give it to people to spend. I mean, it's a very dangerous inflationary tool that I wouldn't want to put in the hands of the government. So if we were going to have a central bank digital currency backed by real money, backed by gold, I'd be all in favor of that one. But because then the supply would be limited to the amount of gold that the government had on deposit to back it up. But nobody's talking about that.
Well, if I'm not mistaken, isn't Texas doing something similar to that?
Yeah, Texas has talked about creating its own gold-backed currency, which it's certainly within its constitutional rights to do. The only restriction on states when it comes to money is that they can't print paper money, and neither can the federal government, but of course that happens anyway through the Fed, but the states can't print money, and they can't make anything but gold or silver legal tender. So as long as this digital currency is backed by gold or silver, there's no constitutional prohibition to them introducing it. And they could have it legal tender in their state because it's gold and silver. They could collect taxes in it. They can conduct all their affairs in gold and silver if they want to. And I would certainly suggest that they pursue that. And every state should pursue that and put itself on a sound monetary system rather than just accept the flawed fiat system imposed by the federal government by default.
You talked about like a potential financial crisis somewhere down the line, similar to the 2008 financial crisis. Do you think that is a potential kind of way out of that, or a way to avoid that potential financial crisis? Is that if states start really backing up their monetary systems with gold, is that the way out?
Well, I mean, I think it would be a step in the right direction, but we're going to have a federal crisis. I mean, all the banks are pretty much insolvent. We saw the beginnings of the financial crisis earlier this year, around March, April, when you had Silicon Valley Bank fail, Signature Bank, another one, and basically then the Fed stepped up before the dominoes fell and backstopped the banks. and the banks have been relying on that backstop ever since. But beneath the surface, the insolvency problem is spreading and building, and we've got a date with disaster here. It's going to happen. This financial crisis is going to be much worse than 2008. 2008, it was mainly concentrated in mortgages, and just the mortgages that defaulted, right? The mortgages that didn't default were fine. But now the problem is all the mortgages, because the banks are holding on to mortgages where the borrower is paying 3%, but the cost of money is now 5.5% and rising. And current mortgage rates are in the sevens, close to 8%. So the banks are now insolvent based on the losses that they've experienced on their loan portfolio, which consists predominantly of this paper. And the reason that it's a problem too, it's not just, well, these are on paper. Their customers are withdrawing their money. Why do bank customers want to take out their money? Because they want to earn a yield. They could put it in a money market and get 5%, 5.5%. The banks can't pay 5.5%. They've already loaned it out for 30 years at 3%. So the customers are taking their money out of the bank. The banks are all insolvent. Now, how are they fending off bankruptcy right now? Well, the Fed is backstopping them. They're taking their mortgages or their treasuries that are worth 60, 70 cents on the dollar or less, and they're going to the Federal Reserve, and the Federal Reserve is giving them a full dollar. And then they're taking that dollar and they're giving it to their customers who are leaving the bank. But the problem is, how are the banks going to repay the loan? They don't have the money. They gave it back to their depositors. And if they took the loans back on their books, they would be immediately insolvent. So this is a huge crisis because it's much bigger than '08. And then you've got the commercial real estate crisis that didn't even exist back in '08. Commercial real estate was fine back then. In fact, their loans went up in value as interest rates dropped to zero in 2009. But the commercial real estate is a nightmare. The prices have collapsed. You're going to get lots of defaults in commercial real estate, and that means huge losses for the lenders. We have so much more debt now than we did in 2008. Everybody, from the government on down, is more heavily leveraged now than they were in 2008. And interest rates are already higher than they were in 2008.
Yeah.
And so, I listen to some of these, analysts trying to say, oh, we don't have to worry about this rise in interest rates because they're just going back to normal. Yeah, that's the problem. We can't handle normal interest rates. We have an economy built on 0% interest rates. We have an abnormal amount of debt. You try to put a normal interest rate on an abnormally indebted economy, and it doesn't work. And so the whole thing has to implode. The debt has to be defaulted. We have to go back to a normal level of debt if we're going to have a normal interest rate.
So when you talk about a crisis bigger than 2008, everyone listening is going to just internally freak out and think when. Now, I know it's really hard to predict stuff like this. Oh, well, soon is relative. Do you have a general timeline in your head of when you think something like this might happen?
Well, at the rate that interest rates are now rising and that the deficits are exploding, it should be, maybe by the end of this year or sometime in the first half of next year, we should be in a full-blown crisis. Now, the only way that this won't happen is if the Federal Reserve preemptively kicks the can down the road one more time. And I don't know, how much time they're going to buy with another can kick. But what the Fed is going to have to do is it's going to have to go back to quantitative easing in a big way. And it may, in fact, even have to cut rates. And if they do that, then, that could buy us some time. But I don't know how much, because inflation is going to take off and just kick into a whole new gear when they do that. How long it's going to take, for the markets to come to terms. I mean, maybe it'll be right away, maybe it'll be instantaneous, or maybe it could be weeks or months down the line. But it won't be years, I don't think.
Wow. Okay. And then what do you think about the timeline for something like CBDCs, because that would seem like it'd be the perfect time to implement something like that in America. Because when there's crisis and lies opportunity, right? So the saying goes, and you know, we already have.
Yeah, but I don't know how much good it's going to do. I mean, if the problem is the dollar, if the dollar's crashing, just putting a dollar on a blockchain is not going to make it any more desirable. I mean, our trade deficits are going to be going through the roof. So it's not going to solve the problem. You know, so I don't know that it'll even be offered as a solution.
Yeah, because I feel like, I mean, it's a lot of this stuff. Like I've seen people reference, like, I don't know, the government's giving away, you know, just putting money in people's bank accounts all the time these days, it seems. You know, you have the fires in Maui and all of a sudden everybody has $700. You go back to COVID and all these like different stipends and stuff. So it's just over time with all these crises, the dollar is just continuously being devalued. It's like it almost already. Yeah, go ahead.
And it's being propped up by its reserve status, which is, you know, going to be lost here soon. But you know, there is really no appreciation for money or what it's worth or what governments can do, because everybody just thinks the government can solve every problem. You know, I was just listening on the radio today, talking about the shortage of housing and how rents are going up, and people were talking about, and this is on a financial channel, they're talking about, well, what can the government do to help alleviate the problem of rising rents? And they were like, well, you know, we can have tax credits for this, or tax credits for building and this. And it's like, well, where are the tax credits coming from? I mean, the government that's just more inflation. If you're just going to cut taxes or give people vouchers, what they were talking about, to pay for higher home costs, you're just fueling the fire, because the government doesn't have any money. So it either has to take the money out of the economy directly, or it's got to print money and take the purchasing power out of the economy. But there is no magic elixir where the government can increase supply. All the government can do is increase demand by printing money. It's the private sector that creates the supply. Now, if they'd have talked about, hey, let's get rid of some regulations that are running up the cost of production and delaying production, that would help. You know, let's cut government spending so that we could reduce the burden on the private sector, so that we won't have to tax them as much, so that they can be more productive. That would help. You know, they can stop subsidizing consumer borrowing, so that there'd be more resources available for productive investment. But they don't talk about any of that. It's just like, well, what can the government do? Who can the government give money to? Well, it doesn't have any money to give. Right. And it doesn't make anything. It doesn't produce anything other than red tape, which, you know, makes it harder for everybody else to produce.
Yeah.
So no, I mean, there's nothing the government could do. But the problem is, the politicians want to get votes, and the way you get votes is promising to do something. Somebody's in trouble. Oh, let me help. Let me give you money. And everybody just assumes that the government has the money because they have the printing presses. But just because you can print money doesn't mean the money you're printing has any value. In fact, the more you print, the less value it has.
Well, yeah, politicians are experts in red tape and making promises for sure. But, you know, if you're talking about the horizon is really short here for a big financial crisis, I mean, is the best opportunity in terms of financial standpoint to just leave the country? This seems like it's going to be a global problem, though. Am I wrong?
Well, it's a global problem, but in many ways, it's the solution to the global problem, because the big problem in the world is the massive imbalances that exist between the United States and the rest of the world. So we're just a gigantic, cancer on the global economy, I think, because we just consume way too much as a nation, and we've put the cost of that on the rest of the world, right? And we've exported our inflation everywhere else. So Americans, collectively live beyond their means, but the only way that's possible is because the rest of the world collectively lives beneath its means to finance that extravagance. But you have these huge imbalances, and you have a lot of other governments that have pursued reckless monetary policy in response to the reckless monetary policy of the Fed. So I think when this whole U.S. dollar centric monetary system implodes, that's actually going to be a huge benefit for the rest of the world. I mean, not necessarily equally, but in totality, because it's a burden that's been lifted from their backs. And so what it really will mean is a number of people now will no longer have to support America. They'll be able to consume more themselves. They'll be able to have a higher standard of living because more of the resources and production that was diverted to America will stay outside America for the enjoyment of the rest of the world. But the real game changer is America, because now all of a sudden we have to fend for ourselves. We can't rely on factories in China anymore. If we want to consume, we've got to produce. If we want to borrow, we've got to save. We just can't borrow from, the rest of the world. We have to generate our own savings domestically. And so the economy is not built for that. We have this consumption-based economy that doesn't work unless we can import the goods that we're all consuming. And we consume based on debt, not based on incomes. Well, we need lenders to facilitate that. So when this whole system falls apart, it's much worse for America in the short run. We have a much bigger adjustment. And it's going to be difficult in the political environment that we're in to make that adjustment, because the pressure is going to be to make government bigger when we can't even afford the government we got. We need to make government smaller. But, that's not where the political wind is going to blow unless more people realize that the government is the source of the problem and that free markets is the way out of it, that we got to get the government out of the way. The government dug us into this hole, and digging it deeper is not the way out.
Do you think that where do you think cryptocurrency fits into this conversation? Because I know you talked about, the dollar being backed up by gold, but a lot of people are just yelling about cryptocurrency, Bitcoin, Dogecoin, all this stuff.
Bitcoin saves the world.
Yeah, how Bitcoin's going to save the world. Where do you think that fits in?
Yeah, well, people that say that have a vested interest in it because generally they own Bitcoin and they're trying to get other people to buy it so that they can sell it. But no, I don't think these cryptocurrencies are the answer. I think they're just another problem. There's no intrinsic value in these tokens. I understand the need to have an alternative to the dollar, but I don't think these cryptocurrencies are viable alternatives. I think the alternative is gold. Gold's been the alternative for thousands of years. I think blockchain and modern technology makes gold even more efficient and better to use as money than it's been in the past when we didn't have this technology, when you were limited by paper and all you can do is have a paper currency backed by gold. Now you can have a digital currency backed by gold and have all the benefits of the ease of negotiating that digital currency around the world and using it as a medium of exchange. So you get all the benefits of Bitcoin, actually more so because it's faster and cheaper, but you also have the added benefit of the store of value because you have gold behind it as opposed to nothing but hype behind it. But the governments are imposing barriers, making it very expensive for the private sector to offer this alternative. And again, the government uses terrorism, drug dealers, tax evasion, all that as why we need these draconian regulations on anybody who would want to offer a superior alternative to a fiat currency. So the government wants to protect its monopoly, and so it wants to use its power to try to limit competition. Because if it was a level playing field, the government would lose because its product stinks, right? The dollar is lousy money.
Yeah, what do they say? Like the government just a corporation with a monopoly on violence, which is what gives it its edge in the market. But talk to me for a second about the crash. Like, what is the scale of this crash that you see forthcoming? Are we talking bread lines and we're talking like depression level? We're talking worse. What do you kind of foresee? Yeah,
we're talking pretty bad. Because we're in much worse shape than we were in 2008, and I don't see a bailout working again. Not that the last bailout worked. Right. It simply sowed the seeds for what we're going to be experiencing. But I just don't think that it's possible that they could bail out everybody again and we're not going to have to deal with the consequences for over a dozen years, right? Which is, here we are in 2023 dealing with the consequences of the mistakes they made in 2009. Now, of course, those mistakes were compounded in 2010, 2011, 2012, and of course, what they did with COVID was just completely unreal in 2020. Just kind of like the punctuation on that insanity is what we did in 2020 with COVID and the money printing there. But this is a horrific crisis, and the only way out of it is to make it worse, because the only way out of it is massive inflation. And so there you have the risk of hyperinflation, which is decimating to an economy. It's one thing if, your bank fails and you lose your money. It's another thing if your bank doesn't fail, but your money loses all of its purchasing power. I mean, that's worse, right? Everybody is wiped out then if the money doesn't have any value. What good is it if you still have it, if you can't buy anything? Because the paper money is a means to an end. I mean, it's not, you don't want the bills because you want to hoard them. You want to buy stuff with them. And if none of the people that have stuff to sell will take them because they don't have any trust that they're going to be worth anything 5 minutes after you give them to them, the whole thing breaks down. And so that's where we are. And if you're talking about, are we going to have bread lines? I think there's a real possibility that we will have bread lines. And the reason will be that, the bakers, the farmers won't necessarily be willing to, sell what they produce for worthless currency. But even before that happens, as prices really start to rise, especially for food, the government is likely to put in price controls. They're going to say, you can't charge $10 for a loaf of bread. People can't afford that. So let's, have price control. And from Econ 101, and you pretty much have to flunk a course in Econ 101 to get a job as a government economist, right? But if you put on price controls, you are going to create shortages, and if you have shortages, you need to have rationing, because that's the only way, to alleviate the problem. See, the way the free market rations good is through price. So price goes up and demand goes down and the market clears. But if you artificially suppress price and you allow demand to rise, then there's a shortage. And then what do? Either you have long lines and the people that get there first get everything, right? Because then there's nothing left for the people at the end of the line. Or you ration things. You limit quantity that people can buy. And so all this stuff is going to happen. And then, what also happens then is you create a black market, because somebody doesn't want to wait in line 8 hours to get bread. So they pay a market price to buy it illegally. But then the illegal price of bread is way higher than what it would have been absent the price controls, because now the person who's selling you that bread illegally, well, he risks going to jail, or he lists a huge fine. So because of the added risk of selling you bread illegally, the price is a lot higher, right? Just like, why were our legal drugs? I mean, you want to buy cocaine, it would be really cheap if it was legal. But because it's illegal, it's expensive, because the guy selling it to you is, doesn't have as much competition, because, there's not a lot of people willing to go to jail, right, to sell you the cocaine. But it's a much more expensive purchase, because you're buying it on the black market. So anytime the government forces you to buy something illegally, you're going to pay a lot of money for it, right? When that happens, more so than you would pay for it to buy it legally. If you had the private sector, non-criminals that were you could do business with.
So what do you, if you don't mind me asking, I think a lot of people would be curious to know exactly, like, as an expert like yourself, what are you doing to prepare? Is it investing in gold?
Well, that's one of the things. I mean, my investments reflect my dire outlook, and they have for some time, for the dollar. So pretty much all the stocks I own, with a few exceptions of some energy stocks and some mining stocks, are foreign. They're they're in Asia, they're in Europe. So I'm trying to get out of Dodge. I just see some real problems here.
Yeah, right.
And not that I don't think there are problems in other countries. I just think that ours are greater. So it's just it's like a triage, like I'm picking the lesser of the evils. But I want to own real things, so I don't want to own paper in an inflationary time period. I mean, it's an inflationary problem for the whole world. It's not just the United States. I think we're just going to feel it, particularly hard based on, the situation that we're in. But yeah, I mean, people should contact me at my asset management firm before it's too late. Whenever they're seeing this, hopefully it's not too late and you can do something to protect yourselves and get out of harm's way. I can, take your portfolio, whether you got an IRA, a pension, or just a taxable account, I could reorient it in good quality dividend paying value stocks around the world, build you a, kind of dollar crash, inflation proof type stagflation portfolio. That's what you need. You don't want to have any of the stocks that did well during the 2000s and the 2010s. I mean, those were the stocks that lived by the bubble, and they're dying as the bubble deflates. You want to be out of those stocks. Unfortunately, those are the stocks that most people will be holding on to, as the ship sinks. So you want to abandon that ship before it sinks, or at least early before it takes on too much water. And you should buy gold and silver. I've got Schiff Gold. I think we've got the best prices and a lot of customer service that other gold firms don't offer. And we don't try to bait and switch you into becoming a coin collector and overpaying for some, so-called numismatic coin. We sell, popular bullion coins, bars, rounds at very low premiums over spot. So you get to maximize the gold and silver that you buy, for the fiat currency that you exchange. But yeah, you got to prepare financially. I mean, does it make sense? Should people have a store of things, that non-perishables, foods that won't go bad, items that they might need, batteries, toiletries, cleansers, all kinds of stuff that, you just take for granted that when you run out of, razor blades, you could just go down to the store and you could buy them, but they may not be there in a couple of years. So buy them now. It's not like, worst case scenario, you just use them later. But I mean, let's say that the cost of razor blades is going to go up 20% a year. Doesn't it make sense to buy the next 10 years worth of razor blades right now? Unless you think they're going to have an invention that makes them so much better, but at least you'll have them. And you might be able to barter them. Some guy might want some of your razor blades and he might give you something that you need in exchange for, a razor blade. But, he may not need the money there, the paper money. Nobody might need that. So you got to have things that other people, that's why a lot of people will probably stock up on cigarettes, even if you don't smoke. I mean, why do you think cigarettes are money in prison? Even the inmates who don't smoke want cigarettes because they know somebody in the prison smokes. Somebody wants them.
Yeah.
So they have intrinsic value.
We were just having this conversation about like things that like these luxury items that people are going to trade somewhere down the line when the money system crashes.
Yeah, they were joking in COVID. Remember the toilet paper was in short supply.
Toilet paper's currency.
Yeah.
The only problem with toilet paper is it takes up a lot of space when you're storing it, right? Because it's so. But yeah, I mean, you want to have a lot of toilet paper, but I guess what you're going to have to do, is just use it sparingly, which, I mean, as a guy, I can do, but I don't know if you ever watch how your wives or girlfriends use toilet paper, but they go through this stuff. I mean, they'll go like this. They'll pull it down. They'll go like this. They'll take, a third of the roll. I mean, they go through it like, So
washable
they got
cloths.
and then after they get a whole big thing about it, they just think that's it. And they toss the whole thing in the toilet. They use like a month's worth of toilet paper for me, just in one sitting.
That's financially irresponsible if that's currency.
But once the cost of those rolls really goes up, we take it for granted,
It's true.
But people are going to have to start, economizing, cutting back, on stuff.
So, but the picture you have for the near future is pretty damn grim. And I can't, after studying what the WEF's agenda is going forward, I can't help but think that they also know that this is probably the future for at least America. And they have some kind of plans to maybe not mitigate that, but utilize the crisis for their benefit. And I mean, you see their plans with like the 15-minute cities and the digital IDs, this kind of thing. They even talk about shutting down the internet and having the internet 2.0, where you have to have an ID to get on there. No more pseudonyms. You got to have, it's all a personal game, kind of like a social credit system. I mean, I can't help but think that there is some kind of at least plan going forward with the, whatever you want to call the WEF's agenda, 2030, all that. Do you kind of see that as well?
Well, the left, a large segment of the left, and certainly the politically active and vocal portion, doesn't believe in capitalism. They never have. They're socialists, Marxists, whether they want to admit it or not, and they ignore all of the lessons of history that prove that their crazy theories don't work. But they just think that it does work. They just haven't had the right people to implement it. And if they can get in charge of the economy, they're so smart and they're so caring that they could do it. And so, yeah, I mean, that's where they want to go. I mean, they're foolish enough to believe that we'd all be better off, with a government centrally planned economy. Get rid of the greedy capitalists who are trying to make a profit and exploit their workers, and let's replace them with these, all-knowing, benevolent bureaucrats who can make fair decisions for an equitable distribution of the wealth, so everybody is equal. And they're right. Everybody will be equal. They'll be equally poor, equally impoverished, with the exception of a small group of bureaucrats who's very rich. Right? They forget about that. It's like you get instead of having some entrepreneurs who get rich by enriching everybody else, you get a small group of bureaucrats that get rich by impoverishing everybody else.
Well, true. Okay, final question here for you. I don't know if you're a religious man at all, but do you see CBDCs as some kind of mark of the beast, end times prophecy kind of a thing? Had to ask for making a video on it.
I never thought about it in those terms. So no, I mean, I don't know. I mean, maybe Nostradamus has something where he somehow predicted this. I don't know. Or I don't know if it's in the Revelations portion of the Bible. But I mean, you could try to read anything into it. Yeah. But I just think that we are repeating the mistakes of history. What we're living through is nothing new. History is replete with examples of societies destroying themselves for the exact same reasons that we're doing it now. And that's the interesting thing, because we have a lot more technology now than we ever have. So, we supposedly should be less prone to repeat these mistakes, yet we're not. I mean, our tools get more sophisticated, but human beings don't. We're still ruled by the same emotions, the greed, the fear, the envy. And so it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter how much smarter we get or how much more technology we have. We just repeat the cycle. Yeah. And so hopefully there's, at the other side of this, at some point in the future, we have another renaissance of smaller government, individual liberty. We recognize the problems of government and we remove those shackles and have a revolution and the pendulum swings in the other direction. And at least, humans will have a lot more technology to help them rebuild what the government destroys.
Yeah, I do think the pendulum will swing. There's always that saying, good times make weak men make bad times make strong men make good times. It's always a cycle.
Weak men with nuclear weapons make end times. I think that's how that goes.
Now there are some people that think that maybe it's the AI that's going to do us all in. We'll see. I mean, hopefully it becomes a very good tool.